thinking about all the disasters we have encountered of late, wondering if we are learning from our experiences. Pause, think about it with intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear what Dr. Harry Earl Munnings Jr. got to say about whether we are progressing, regressing, or just going through the motions.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. What we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 242.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. And here this evening, as we said before, we have the honorable, most esteemed, most worthy researcher extraordinaire from the medical profession that covers all grounds, not just medicine, but he digs on the worms, flies planes all around the world. He'll tell us a little bit about what he does. So we want to welcome you, Doc, to the show. Something to think about. And
Thank you. Thank you, Happy.
I don't know why we're not on the plane today, but anyway.
It's good to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Awesome. Yes, you're quite welcome. You're touching off your head a little bit, but I'm sure you adjust at a time. Yeah. Okay, so tell us a little bit about you. Who is Harry Munnings? As I know, you got all kind of fancy names like Alexander the Great and all these kind of things, but I know you as Harry.
Who is Harry Munnings? Harry Munnings is a physician, gastroenterologist, born in the Bahamas to two Eleuthera natives. My dad was born in Bluff, and my mother was a Topham Bay Carey. She had four of us. I'm the oldest of four. I have a baby sister, Judge Carol, a younger brother, Tim, who's just become world champion again in track. And my youngest brother, Leslie, is a union leader and aviation aeronautics expert with Bahamas Air.
Yeah.
So that's the four of us.
Plenty pedigree of activism.
So I am a physician that specializes in digestive diseases. Awesome. And one of my interests outside of medicine is history, and in particular medical history. And about 20 years ago, I got a bug that had me researching medicine in the Bahamas, and particularly accidents and disasters that impacted medicine and impacted how we do things. And that was what led to the birth of several books looking at. And I never set out to be an expert in medical history. I set out to satisfy a curiosity of how come I wasn't taught this? How come I never heard about that? And so I think that's what's attracted me to this space.
Yeah. Awesome. So you mentioned in your books, and one of the books, your most latest books, which is I forgot to do something. But anyway, you mentioned these books, and this book here, A Hard Lessons to Waste, is getting rave reviews. There's some I would probably try and find the read from, two in particular. One is my mom, and the other one is Honorable Sean McQueenie. And so, so it stimulates a lot of thought that is happening inside this society as we go from strength to strength. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask, because you got a lot of questions coming from other people too, was that how you discuss various disasters in this book. What do you believe are the most critical lessons we should have learned from these events? Did you hear me?
I would say let's see. One of the things that emerged was the fact that human nature hasn't changed. Human nature hasn't changed. You know, there've been liars, thieves, and murderers for as long as there've been angels and saints, and we've always had both. And in every disaster, we see both of them spring into action. And so we have to prepare. When we prepare for disasters, we have to anticipate that both sides of that coin are going to appear. There will be rescuers and do-gooders and people that go above and beyond looking after themselves and their immediate families. And I saw that in every disaster that I've looked at, as well as persons that come out of the woodwork and take advantage of havoc and disorder to enrich themselves. And I've seen that, as I say, in every disaster, from the tornado of 1850 to the cholera disaster, to the Yarmouth Castle disaster, to the Taylor gas explosion, all of them, and of course Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19. It seems that the same themes play over and over. The exact circumstances change, but the themes are not there. And so there is an opportunity to prepare. We know that when the next disaster comes, there will be angels and saints and crooks and worms coming out of the woodwork. And we can put systems in place to mitigate that. Just as the government has put systems in place, you know, for years, government money went missing at various government offices until at one point systems were put in place and the government said, okay, we're not collecting money here anymore.
Right.
You pay online, you pay by credit card, but don't bring any cash and put in a tin. And that system has saved us, Bahamian people, a lot of money that used to just vanish.
Right.
You know, the crooks and the thieves are still there, but now they have to find a different way to take from us. And that was the lesson that I kept seeing. I mean, what we need is a system. We need a system to make it easy for persons that want to do good and not frustrate them, as well as systems that make it difficult for persons who want to take advantage of us, make it more difficult. No, you're not going to make it impossible. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned that, and so the question I would ask is, how do we define disaster? Because you mentioned a number of things some people might know about and some they might not know. And so let's define that so people can understand what context we're talking about.
The standard definition of a disaster is any event that overwhelms the standard capability to manage. Some adverse event. So it's a disaster that's not something that is unexpected, usually unexpected, although sometimes we can see a disaster is coming and we have a chance to prepare. Like the Department of Meteorology will tell you that, you know, on Friday, you're going to be under a hurricane watch or a hurricane. So we can see a disaster coming and we can prepare. But if the event overwhelms your ability to cope, then that's a disaster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. We can work with that. So then from your book, then you speak about cholera. So is cholera considered a disaster?
Cholera is a horrible disease to have. Okay. It's a horrible disease. And the thing that makes cholera potentially a disaster is that, like COVID-19, it isn't one person that gets it. It's hundreds or thousands of persons, a whole community, a whole country. And you can have so many persons sick that there's nowhere for them to go. There are not enough caregivers to look after them. And so persons are left suffering alone without the ability to get medical care. So that makes cholera not just a deadly disease for an individual, but a disaster for a community.
Right.
Yeah. And the cholera disaster that we had did exactly that. It totally overwhelmed the country's ability to cope.
Okay.
And you know, the government opened up a hospital in Baintown. It opened up a hospital somewhere in the east. It hired doctors, it hired nurses, and still persons were dying without ever seeing a doctor or a nurse. And so it really was a disaster. The government invoked emergency powers, just as we've had with COVID-19. The government told the doctors and pharmacists, you know, whatever is needed, just send it and send us the bill later. And really opened the government's coffers. And we saw in the cholera disaster that many persons took advantage of that. Yes, well, maybe we can talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, and this was before the present systems or structures of governance that we have.
Yeah, we were still a British colony.
Right.
This was 1850. This 1852. This was in the Governor Gregory was the governor who Gregory's Arch and Gregory Town Eleuthera is named after.
Right, right.
He
so
was
all of the people who cry that all these things happening is only happening because we have the type of governments that we have today is a fallacy then.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Cholera doesn't worry about who's in government. Hurricane isn't interested in whether the PLP or the FNM is in power. It's coming. Right. And systems need to be in place to deal with these disasters. And it's good for them to be in place in advance. So Governor Gregory was the governor. Yeah. There were 4 doctors. Dr. Chipman, who Chippingham is named after. Dr. Kirkwood, who lived on E Street. Dr. Duncombe, Frederick Duncombe. He was the principal donor in the fundraiser to build Christ Church Church Hall. His older brother was the first Bahamian Anglican priest. So he was the only born Bahamian doctor at the time. And then there was another Dr. Clutson. So there were 4 doctors, and they were totally overwhelmed. And of course, at that time, the cause for the disease wasn't known.
Right.
Yeah, the disease was thought to be bad air.
So most that get to be epidemics or pandemics struggling for a source, right? So, but given your background in medicine and science, etc., how did you your experiences influence your perspectives and approach to writing about this epidemic, the cholera epidemic?
Well, it was an eye opener. My first interest was, how did the doctors respond to this epidemic? How did the doctors respond? I mean, it wasn't until almost 1900 they discovered that cholera was caused by bad water. They thought yellow fever was caused by bad air. They thought malaria was caused by some poison in the air. And that's where the name malaria comes from, literally, malaria, bad air. And yellow fever and cholera, they would tell you, open the windows, don't go inside. And don't drink alcohol. And wrap your abdomen in turpentine. And drink strong coffee. All sorts of things that to us now seem crazy. But the government turned to doctors, and these were not doctors that just labeled themselves. Two of them had their degree from the University of Edinburgh. So the government turned to the doctors for expert advice. And the expert advice today is totally laughable. But the government went ahead with what they recommended. People were told to stock up on mustard and turpentine so that when they got stomach cramps, they could wrap and pour. Oh, it just seems laughable now. But I see the parallels in our management of COVID-19 when we didn't really know. We didn't really know how you got it. You know, we knew it was a respiratory thing, but could you get it from your groceries? We didn't really know.
Right.
So early days, I mean, we would spray our groceries and take off your shoes outside. Now we know it's a respiratory. It's all respiratory. It's almost all airborne. But
Yeah, but I would tell you that doing that, even some of us scientists here would have said some things that just didn't make sense as to what the world governments were telling us to do. That it just
yes,
logically didn't make sense. So there had to be some level of panic, I'm thinking, that was involved in that whole process. And it couldn't just be ignorance and the like. But we can talk about that a little bit down. So let me try and get through some of these questions that people have been sending me, because you were like a movie star. The amount of people who send questions to me, I think there's more people do that for this show than has been for any of my other shows, and so forth. And so when we look at that, then if we look at the question next one, they say, what inspired you to write about this, and why do you believe that the episode that has been largely overlooked, this cholera, why nobody talks about it? Because that's what
yes.
we tend to do on the show. We talk about things that people don't talk about, right?
That very question I addressed at the end of the book. That I had
Okay.
that same question. It was so well documented. Unlike a lot of uh, the disasters and hurricanes and whatnot, I mean, where there are a few stories, this disaster was well documented. I mean, the Nassau Guardian was publishing from 1844, so the Guardian had been around. They were publishing twice or three times a week, and um, every week they released statistics. So many people were found dead. So many people were found really ill. Enough statistics were released that I was able to get my son's help to draw a graph and an Excel spreadsheet. So it was really well documented. The doctors wrote letters back to England and they were published. We know the name of the first person that got cholera all those years ago. So how come we don't know about it?
Right.
And I believe that the government deliberately suppressed it. They
Mm.
didn't want to hear it because out of the disaster, there were so many recommendations and things that the government needed to do to improve the lives of residents, and government didn't want to hear it. They wanted to get commerce back up and running, and they didn't want to hear about providing more nurses and providing clean water and whatnot. So it goes quiet. The record goes quiet after the disaster, and it isn't really mentioned again in the newspaper in any significant way for another 10, 15 years when the hurricane of 1866 hit. And then there's a mention in the newspaper that there are bones in the road, and we believe that the hurricane washed out the cholera graves.
Right.
So I think they deliberately just said, y'all don't talk about this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Make it easier for their agenda. So
Yeah.
that begs the question then, in terms of what you said earlier, how does then these two compare, the great cholera epidemic and the COVID pandemic?
COVID-19, cholera was
Yeah.
much worse.
Mm-hmm.
The cholera disaster was much worse than COVID-19.
So
Um,
before you go on then, so the question I would ask is that if cholera was much worse, then if we shut down a whole country and put one person to be responsible for making all decisions, did they do the same for cholera?
well, the governor had responsibility for everything. He was the CEO of the country. There was no parliament that debated anything. He would inform. He would inform the executive council. They would meet. The minutes that describe the government's response are still in the archives. But the governor was the man. Now, the cholera epidemic hit while he was away on vacation, and so it was the deputy governor that handled the response for the first couple of months. But yeah, he had carriage of the matter. So yes, it was under the. Now he delegated decisions to the Board of Health. He said, I will, do what you doctors recommend. And the doctor said, we need more turpentine and mustard and calamine lotion. And so he authorized the government to send to Andros and Ragged Island and Harbor Island, whatever they needed. And the government stores quickly ran out, but pharmacists said, well, we have some in our private pharmacy. We can send what you need. So they send it and they get the bill later. And only after the epidemic and the bills start rolling in, government said, boy, we didn't realize we were going to be spending all of this. They tried to pull back, but government, and that was at a time when the government really did not want to spend money on health at all. That's one of the big changes between then and now. Today, health is a big priority, but back then, health was not a priority.
Not big enough, yeah. Okay, so how do the bureaucracy of missteps or the medical blunders during the epidemic affect the outcome? You talked about the shortages, etc. And are there any lessons that we could do? So today we always have these nurses arguing that there's not enough nurses. The nurses go in, being pulled away to more, I guess, prosperous territories for them. We don't seem to be able to plug that hole. So I guess this question the person's asking is what do we learn from it so that we could know, we could stop.
What did we learn? Well, we didn't learn anything. For one thing, nobody really knows about it. So it wasn't like the government said we will leave a record for future persons to learn from this. They suppressed it. And there were so many lessons there. That's why I titled the book A Hard Lesson Wasted. It really was a hard lesson. I mean, the magnitude of the disaster is mind-boggling. The cholera disaster lasted about 3 months. Wow. We are, 4 years into COVID-19, and a total of 800 and something, almost 900 people killed from COVID-19. And the cholera epidemic killed more persons, killed 1,200 persons in 2 months, 3 months. And that was at a time when the population was a fraction of what it is now. So it was much, much worse, much worse. There were so many lessons.
My mom tells me Nassau only had 50,000 people back in the day when they moved into Chippewa.
Yes, it was only, the whole Bahamas had 27,000 approximately back in 1850. And the two most populous islands were Nassau or New Providence and Harbor Island. And those were where most deaths were. Harbor Island was really badly hit. Harbor Island was the only island outside of the capital that had a cholera hospital. The government saw fit to rent a building just for cholera patients. Right. And that was in Dunmore Town back in 1852. So, what did we learn? Well, I mean, now the lessons are visible to persons that read the book, because I have unearthed what we went through. Mm-hmm. But the government wasn't interested in providing more nurses. We had the same problem. They ran out of nurses. The government hired as many as it saw fit to hire. And it told persons that if you had someone who was ill, to take them to the cholera hospital in Bain Town. But, only went there to die. So persons did their best not to go to the cholera hospital. And the government complained about persons not bringing their loved ones to the cholera hospital, but trying their own home remedies. But the home remedies were probably safer than what us doctors were doing in the cholera hospital. You were better off if you avoided the doctor. I mean, they didn't know it was bad water. So when you got dehydrated and you asked for water, what did they give you? The same poisonous water that had given them cholera in the first place. So yeah, the death rate in the cholera hospital was 2/3.
Yeah. So the Bahamian culture, this question is asking then, our approach, etc. Are we learning from these past experiences? Do we tend to listen and learn, or are we often resistant?
We certainly do learn. I mean, if you read Wayne Neely's description of the hurricanes that have come through and how many persons used to be killed by roofs falling on their head, and what we learned was we need a building code that can withstand certain amounts of wind. And so now most deaths after hurricanes are from storm surge, not from roof collapsing. We can't protect against everything. Category 5 is going to take off every roof, but persons used to lose their roof in the category 1 and 2, and that doesn't happen anymore. So that's been learned. But what we lacked and what we lagged behind other countries in our region was a disaster management agency. We have one now. We have NEMA, but we were one of the last in the Caribbean. St. Lucia was ahead of us in forming a disaster management agency. We lagged behind the Caribbean in providing clean water. Barbados got hit by cholera. They had clean water in the 1860s. When did we get our water tower? 1927. And even then, you only got clean water if you lived around the water tower. It took years before the clean water was distributed throughout the island. So, yeah, we hard-headed. We learned slowly. And again, what has been lacking and what is still lacking is a publication that is not a witch hunt, but a publication like the 9/11 Commission saying this is what happened, this is what we can learn from it.
That's what that in a second do. Yeah. So this other question here was in terms of mitigating against the disasters. We've gone through a series of hurricanes, all the way from the Miami hurricanes and all of those that did some major disaster work in the Bahamas and all the way up to Florida and Caribbean. But it seems like we always dismiss when a new one comes. We always say, "Oh, this is the worst one. This is the worst one. This one." But we've had them. But are we really applying what we learn from these things? That's why I asked the question: are we learning from them, or are we just listening to hear?
Yes, well, that's a good question. I mean, are we learning? Are we learning? There are lessons to be learned. I think one of the big ones is to have a disaster plan in place that removes the bottleneck. Something you mentioned earlier was, the competent authority and everything having to come through one person or one small group. I mean, there ought to be a disaster plan in place that says once the Prime Minister or the competent authority declares that this is a disaster, you, Mr. Head of Local Government in this community, are automatically authorized to allow people to come into the community. You don't have to get a work permit for somebody to, you don't have to have a shipping permit or whatever it is that bottleneck that stops people who want to help from coming in. But it has to be a declared disaster for X period of time. Once a plan needs to be in place that specifies where things go and how they're stored and who has the authority to release them. It can't all be one person. Delegation is important. Delegate to persons in the community authority to do things when a disaster is declared. And I think that was what that was one of the things that was really that really frustrated persons during Hurricane Dorian. I know that I got involved in some of the rescue missions, wearing my pilot hat, and there were challenges that stemmed from persons reluctant to overstep their authority. But we were in a disaster area, and you can't write a letter and wait for a stamp that's authorized by the minister and whatnot when persons are crying for help. And you have a plane and friends have a plane and they want to go and take something or bring something. Oh, no, you can't bring that. Customs has to check this. And there needs to be a system, because you don't want to open the floodgates so that the demons can start bringing in guns and drugs and whatnot and say these are disaster supplies.
But it got to be effective.
But there are smart people that know, and we're not the only country that has dealt with disasters. We have regional partners that have to deal with mudslides every monsoon, and we can learn from our partners.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the 9/11 Commission report, which was, I guess, an American report that the two sides of American politics came together and operated in the interest of nationalism. And they formulated a number of recommendations that they sent to the President of the United States and I guess all of the big
Exactly.
Congresses and stuff like that need to happen. Tell us a little bit about that, and also, do we have an appetite to function like that in the Bahamas? Because we seem to be so tribal on everything today.
The 9/11 Commission was formed by President Bush a year after the planes flew into the World Trade Center. And they got 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans to sit together, gave them the authority to interview persons, to go into any and every agency. And it was not a legal body that was looking for persons to prosecute. Mm-hmm. It was looking at the systems that allowed Osama bin Laden and Al Qaeda to find a way to get fellas on commercial airplanes and take them over. How did that happen was the question that this commission was tasked with. And so they interviewed over 100 people. They went through all sorts of documents and came up with a commission report, several hundred pages long, that they presented to the president. And once Congress had signed off on it, it was released to the public. You can go on Amazon and buy the 9/11 Commission report. It's not a secret document that nobody can look at. I'm sure that it led to changes which have not been published. You find out if you try and be a terrorist. But the things that they recommended needed to be changed were published. And that's one of the things that's different about our society. We don't publish things. If there's a report, it's hidden. It's hidden in the ministry. We can't release that. No, the minister has to sign off on it. We believe we believe in secrecy.
Didn't that because of how the governor acted for cholera in terms of whether he didn't want certain
No,
things
I
to be
think that's
sold?
just a
Is that a
that's just how we operate. That's just how we operate.
yeah? But where it came from? It got to come from somewhere. Yeah.
That's a good question. Is it a legacy of our colonial system? Um, you know, I mean, there are sensible and good reasons why you don't want every civil servant
Yeah. Yeah.
sending documents out. So I think the standard is, we don't mean for it to be secret, but all communications with the ministry come from the permanent secretary. You write to the permanent secretary, and the permanent secretary is the person that decides what is. I mean, they're the professional in the ministry. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can do it. And it might be that that's the bottleneck, that there's just too much for the PS to vet.
To deal with. Right.
But a commission at the moment, my friend and colleague is calling for a commission of inquiry right now into Hurricane Dorian,
Oh, gee.
and I respectfully feel that approach is not what we need. We don't want a commission of inquiry looking for wrongdoing and people who. We want a fact-finding commission that finds what systems are in place, what things need to be changed. Yes, okay. So if rank crookedness and wrongdoing then that may be brought to light and sent to another body. But what we really want is a report on what happened, what really happened, and what can we do better in the event of another Hurricane Dorian. What do we do when you have a body that is unidentified and unclaimed? That's one of the things that I think we should be looking at.
Yeah. So then that begs the question then in terms of, is it arrogance, misinformation, the lack of knowledge, any of those type of parameters that is causing why we are not handling or improving significantly on these events? Because I mean, we had the American in Florida. They used the Bahamas building codes. Me and my brother, your friend, always fight on this, but I tell them you gotta go back in time to figure it out. But they use our building codes to strengthen their building codes, and now we had to go back and use theirs to strengthen ours. Now, chicken and egg kind of thing is where he says it's always theirs first, but there's enough history for when I was in Miami that shows that it was ours that they used first. But that is neither here nor there. But the point is, are we continuing that process of building on top of what was there before, so we could improve and make things better? We talk about the National Development Plan today.
I'm sure the engineers
Right.
are taking note. I mean, they tour and they look at.
Yeah, but who's listening to the engineers?
They look at what worked and what failed, and entrepreneurs who design and build impact windows and whatnot. Look, I mean, it's good business to sell building materials and clips and windows. It's good business to be able to sell them and say, mine withstand X, and I can prove it. Here are photographs from X hurricane. See my competitors' windows? Out, gone. See mine? The label is still on it. That's good business. So it's more than just governments.
Right.
I think one of the things that might hobble us is the fact that we're still a small community, and we don't want to point fingers at cousin and make somebody look bad and whatnot. So what went wrong is suppressed, not because they did something bad, but because they did something that doesn't look good.
Yeah,
We don't want that in a report.
right. But to me, it's more than just what went bad. Because I'm not concerned, me personally, Dale Happy knows, not concerned with what went bad or what went wrong. But I'm more concerned with how do we make it better,
Hmm.
right? And if you don't have the right content and data
But you have to see what
for
went wrong
people to get the input,
to
then the right
improve.
input, then you can improve the system.
Yeah, yeah. You have to see what went wrong.
Yeah.
You have to hear from persons that had difficulties. Um, and, there are so many things that we can fix to improve the aftermath of a disaster. You can't stop the wind, but there were so many disasters that followed the disaster.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I come back to the problem with bodies. I know when I was a medical student in Jamaica, we needed bodies to learn the anatomy on. And Jamaica had in place a system where um, if someone, if there was a body in the morgue that was unclaimed, we
Mm-hmm.
didn't have to just depend on persons who donated their body to science.
Okay.
If the body is unclaimed, it doesn't sit in the morgue for 2, 3, 4 years. The medical school can say, we're looking uh, for X, Y, and Z. Bahamas doesn't have a medical school that teaches anatomy at that level, but we can put things in place so that we don't wind up with 200 persons in the morgue that there's no system in place to bury them or get them out.
Right.
That's a disaster after a disaster. A person stuck in a trailer in a refrigerator is a disaster after a disaster,
Mm-hmm. So are
and
those
that's a
disasters bigger
system
than the
problem.
real disaster?
Yeah, yeah.
I can ask you the questions.
Sorry, I missed. You've asked another question.
No, I say, are those disasters after the disaster bigger than the disasters that we know about?
You know, one of the one of the there are different types of disasters, and acts of God are always easier to reconcile than acts of man.
Okay.
You know, we are much more traumatized by um, someone that goes berserk and shoots up a school
Mm-hmm.
and kills 10 children than by a hurricane that wipes out 1,800. Um, the disaster that's unfolding in the Middle East is really painful to watch. The war going on in Congo is a major disaster, and it's all man-made. But a few years ago there was a hurricane, not a hurricane, an earthquake in Port-au-Prince. It killed 100,000 people,
Mm-hmm.
and we can come to terms with that. We didn't do that. We're at the mercy of the Almighty. We just have to get over it and get around it.
Right.
So, you ask which is worse, the actual disaster or the disaster after the disaster. The disaster that's caused by failure on our part is always more painful than the disaster that's wrought, no matter what the loss of life, the disaster that's wrought by the Almighty. Yeah.
And that's because we could avoid the disaster after the
We
disaster.
can, yeah, but it's in our hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we look at this then, right in tune now, we are some of the greatest athletes, the greatest artists, the greatest of many things. When we get to competing against the world and being amongst the world and just operating.
Hmm.
But when it comes to internal affairs, we seem to struggle with tribalism and all kind of stuff that gets in the way. And that teamwork that we show that we are quite capable of doing at the highest levels seems to disappear. Why?
Well, I would start by saying that we don't have a monopoly on tribalism and foolishness like that. The Bahamas is no monopoly. Um, but you know, um, it's painful when you see the amount of talent, and it seems like we could fix this if only there was a long-term plan and not a 4 or a 5 year plan.
Right.
But
Good. All right. So let's move past that one. So
who am I?
you get
Yes.
I don't get you in trouble today.
Yeah,
But so
that's right.
how important is storytelling? Because you're a storyteller, you're a medical genius. I call you that. Don't mind other
Thank you.
people. But how important? And go read his bio and his stuff on his webpage, folks. You will see. And that's just a touch. But how important is storytelling in ensuring that lessons of the past events like cholera, Dorian, etc., are learned and remembered
Yep.
so that we so-called don't impact it?
That is such a good question. We really need good storytellers because history can be boring and dry. And if it turns people off, we lose the ability to learn our history. And so good storytelling is important. But finding the stories to tell are important. And so many fascinating stories hiding in plain sight. When I'm with the young doctors that I teach, I ask them, what do you think Nassau would be like on a day when 50 tourists got killed in one day? And everybody's eyes open up and you realize, well, boy, that would be a major disaster. That would shake the country up.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, imagine 60 tourists, 70 tourists. And in my lifetime, we've had a disaster that killed 90 tourists visiting the Bahamas in one day. 90.
Didn't have a cruise ship.
And how come you learn about this in school? They're teaching me about the Industrial Revolution and in England and how the first people here were Arawaks, and there's some broken pottery that's left, and there's nothing there. But you need to know that. So I mean, yes, and so you said, well, cruise ship. Yes, it was a cruise ship that used to sail between Miami and Nassau, and it was nearly here. It was by the Berry Islands when it caught fire, burned and sank.
Wow.
And they rescued several hundred people off the ship. I mean, those that died, most of them just never got off the ship. But there were several dozen badly burned survivors that were brought to the Princess Margaret Hospital. And that story is woven into cruise ship safety. I mean, it changed all of cruise ship regulations. It changed how burns are treated around the world. And that was just in 1965. Okay, so before most Bahamians' lifetimes, but most, if not all, Bahamians have heard of Columbus.
Right.
1492. This was 1965, and it's not taught in schools. There are survivors from that disaster in the Bahamas, driving around in taxis, retired, but still traumatized from that. And where is the story of that? It was the cover of Life magazine. It was in Time magazine. Gordon Lightfoot wrote a song about it. Discovery Channel did a whole special on it. Not taught in schools. That was one of the things that I hoped my first book would change, because I wrote a chapter on that disaster in the book on Princess Margaret Hospital.
You mentioned about the gas place that blew up.
That's right. The Taylor gas disaster. That was 3 years later, 1968. And that killed 4 people on Collins Avenue and led to the opening of the hospital's intensive care unit. It led to a complete change in our country's zoning regulations. They shut down the gas stations that used to be on Bay Street. There used to be Malcolm's Garage on Bay Street, where the tourism police station is. There was Bay Street Garage on Bay Street. Malcolm's Garage is no longer there, but Bay Street Garage is still in operation, but they're not on Bay Street anymore. They're on Doswell Street. Right. And then everybody else moved out to Gladstone Road. So zoning regulations changed. And then big one was that the court case that followed that led to the creation of the National Insurance Board. The Taylor gas disaster was 1968. The court case was April 69, and National Insurance Board was formed in December 69. For years, Sir Randall had been crying for some protection for workers, and there was none, and those who were killed in that disaster lost everything. Their families lost everything. And Sir Randall went to Pindling, the new prime minister, and said, "You see, I've been saying we need something for workers in this country." And he said, "Well, I can see you're right." And quick as that, we had the National Insurance Board. Yeah. So didn't learn about that in school. I learned about that from a nurse who, she's retired now, but I was looking for information on when did our hospital's intensive care unit open. And she said, "Oh, that was the day of the Taylor gas disaster." And it's interesting, if you talk to somebody over 70 years old, 65 to 70, they remember that like it's yesterday. People don't talk about it, but you talk to an old person, they remember it.
Does your mom or anybody who was there in reach of you who could make a comment or say something? Let us know, please. And thanks for joining the show. So Doc also mentions, that is an interesting discussion, but why do you think the stories are not told and not included in our history? Because I know that they're revamping the curriculum and stuff, and there's a lot of things that have been changed, but I don't know if we are to where the changes have gone as far as the people would want it to go. But I guess you have to go in steps.
Yeah. My experience is that the teachers do not know this history because they didn't learn it. And so they don't know it, or they've heard about it in a tangential way that was not interesting enough for them to investigate and realize that it is an important part of our history. It's mentioned in dry documents and reports, and unless you have the front page of the Tribune for that November 68, with the flames shooting up and the announcement to please do not come near Collins Avenue because the fire trucks need to get in, and then follow Nikki Kelly's report of the court case, which is heartrending. You don't know the story. And that's one of the things that drives me, unearthing these really important stories that if I could go back to QC as a schoolboy and be offered to hear these stories, I'd have taken up history in school, as opposed to getting out of it as quickly as possible because I wasn't interested in the Industrial Revolution in England.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wasn't interested in school, but anyway, that's a different story. I was interested in playing baseball and becoming a major league player, and listening to Bob Marley and becoming a sound engineer, and that's the only two things I wanted to do. The rest to me in school, traditional school, was not teaching me any of those things. I wasn't interested. So that's a subject by itself. Why are our schools not connecting with our youth?
Yes.
But so, what do you hope readers to take away from, particularly a hard lesson wasted, especially in terms of applying lessons to prevent similar mistakes in the future?
Yes. I think
They my mama was saying.
readers of A Hard Lesson Wasted will be surprised to see how much of our present reality has happened before. And I always laugh when I hear the authorities say, oh, this is unprecedented.
Yeah,
We've never seen anything like this. And I go, well, actually, we have had quarantine before. We have had emergency orders before. We have had um, people finding loopholes and making money during a disaster before. We have had nurses and doctors complaining and frustrated before, years and years and years ago, and over and over. And I think that would be one of the things that someone that reads the story would say, "Wow, we've had this before." Yeah, different time, but as I say, human nature doesn't change, and the disease hasn't changed. Cholera is still around.
mm-hmm.
Haiti is being hammered right now by cholera. Uh, I don't think it will be long before cholera breaks out in Gaza. They've already been hit with polio that we haven't seen here since the 1960s, and most of the world hasn't seen for almost as long.
We did a lot to get rid of that, eh?
Yeah. So that's what I think readers will see, that we have been here before, and we really do need to put systems in place. We don't have to wait for the next disaster and scratch our head and say, boy, we've never seen anything like this. There will be another disaster. There'll be another, it may be COVID-19, it may be COVID 2030. I don't know what it'll be, but we're going to get hit by something.
Mm-hmm.
And we won't know where it comes from. Did it come from a germ warfare lab? Did it come from the wet market we won't know. I mean, they didn't know then.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool. So there are a lot of history because you say that's your love, part of your love. Flying, we know about that. We know about the music. We didn't talk about that, but I guess we bring you back to talk about how well you could sing and play the guitar. So my dad would say the guitar. But, so based on all of this stuff and all of the history that you put in this book, and you have, from speaking to my mom and Sean McGreeny, you seem to have overdone yourself in the research that you went through to put this book together. So on behalf of them, I clap my hands to you and give you the praises for that. And hopefully everybody will read the book. Hopefully we will get people to read it for people who may not be able to read, so that we could learn, and we could learn that yes, no, we are not new. We are 50 plus 1. Yeah, we might be young, but we got a whole legacy behind the 50 plus 1 that we could build on, right? And
Yes.
So, I believe that we have $100 billion economy. A lot of people seem to think that's foolishness, but we can get there. Watch, okay. We can get there. And so, tell us then, in terms of what advice would you give to the Bahamian people so that we could get out of a somewhat rut. I call it a little rut where we believe we have to wait for the PS to do everything, or we can't do this because somebody been telling us this for the last 50 years that we can't do this. But who's tested it to say why we can't do it another way? Right, kind of thing. So what advice would you give the people to become a more resilient future?
I always go back to what Sir Lyndon told me and the group of Bahamian students that were in Jamaica when we were in our final year. This was in the mid 80s, and he came to Jamaica, the great Sandy Sands was the manager of the Pegasus Hotel, the best hotel in Jamaica at the time. And Sir Lyndon sent a message. He wanted all the Bahamian students to come to the Pegasus, and he rented out, took over the whole top floor of the hotel, this restaurant called Talk of the Town. And he greeted all of us as we came in. And then he gave a speech. And what stuck with me was that this was no campaign speech. He was talking to university students, and he said to us, "You all are the future. I know there's some things you don't like about what's happening at home at the moment." And this was the drugs and all that stuff was going on. And he looked right at us and he said, "I know there's some things you don't like about your country. Come home and change it."
Yeah.
And that's my message. I mean, you're Bahamian. This is your place. There's some things you don't like. They're not going to send you any place. You change it. Change it. Don't wait for someone to change it. Jump up and down, and in your corner of expertise and interest, you can change it. I mean, politics I can't do, but I can unearth stories and teach our history in a way that makes it interesting for someone that is not really interested in history, but they want to hear a story, not a made-up story. This really happened. And many or most or all of us have a talent somewhere that can be used to move our country forward and upward in one way or another. You don't have to go into politics, but you can change our country, but you have to do it.
Yes. So welcome, Jasmine Bain. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you can hear me a little better. Wait now. But I understand that you say you're a chef. You need to come cook for us on the show. Let's get some talking as to what's going on in that part of the world that you're in. But thank you for joining in and listening to this wise man with all of his nuggets. We love people from all around the world to join in. We've had people as far as Ghana being a part of the show as we
How
move
about that?
Yes. We sort of a delayed viewership, but they reach and so forth. A couple more messages here. Yes. Abby says, oh, here. One more here. He says, okay, excellent baker. Oh, okay. Food too. More cake and ice cream.
While you're going through your messages, Happy, I want to commend you for what you're doing, raising consciousness in the country. There's enough raucous chat and whatnot, and it's really good to see a smart, committed Bahamian do his part to raise consciousness. So I've known you since we were schoolboys, and it's great to see where you've gone and what you're doing. So hats off to you.
Thank you. Be inspired by people who come before you. So we love to try and do our little piece on building this nation from strength to strength. Thank you. So, Doc, the big question. How do we move from here? We always say pause, think about it with intentional thought, and consider where we go from here. How do we move from here?
How do we move from here? I think first we take stock of where we are. Where are we? And then we have to decide, where do we want to be? And that is what our national development plan, in whatever form it takes, has to articulate. Where do we want to be? Do we want to be the Singapore of the Caribbean? Do we want to be the Barbados of the Caribbean? Do we want to be, I mean, who do we want to be? We need a national vision that captures the imagination of the persons that are going to take us there. We need to go to war for our vision. Just like we decided we want to be independent, and not everybody was on board initially, but the vision was sold by real leaders. And so we need a national vision, leadership that is willing to invest in taking the country's vision there. And then over the next 5 or 10 years, everybody is working towards what they can do to get us there. And that was something that Oprah brought up in one of her shows. Person said, "Well, how do you get that?" I think she was talking to millionaire or billionaire, and how do you get there? And her experience was, in all the many persons that she's interviewed, the so many successful persons that she's interviewed, the thing that struck her was that they all had a clear vision early on of where they wanted to go. And that might be what's missing with us. Where do we want to be? Do we just want to be a big tourist destination? Do we want to be a financial hub? What do we want? And that points us to where we want to go.
Awesome. Well, Doc, I really, 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 let me come closer to the mic, really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing these stories and opening up our minds to go back in history and look at it from a different perspective. And maybe get some storytellers to narrate your books. I know one, a classmate of mine, Ronnie Butler Jr. You know the other one, the one you sang with, but the junior, he does that as a professional. And
okay.
So I'm sure he has a wide base.
Ronnie Butler Jr.
So I think that would be a good one to get in contact with. I could share his contacts with you.
Please.
And so forth. But I asked you 1,000,001 questions, and some more than usual because a lot of people were sending questions, and I tried to make sure at least they flowed in somewhat, because some of the questions were all over the place, and they want you to talk about all kind of things, because obviously you have a reputation out there of being a wise man who is not. Might you have your views as to and your support base that you do for parties, etc., but you don't seem to be one to. When you talk to them, you could always hear the biases coming out. Oh, no, you can't do that. But, you speak intelligently and logically. So I guess that's why people follow you. And so we love that. But you tell us now, what would you like the people to know that we didn't cover? Or I didn't draw to you.
What would I like?
What do you like the audience to know that I didn't draw out from this talk about your books and the subjects of lessons learned?
What I like the audience to know.
That we didn't cover, yeah. Or you might just recap what you want based on what we did and add a little bit more meat to it.
Yeah, I would just recap that, our history is fascinating, that so much of what we've gone through has happened before. And it's important to know our history. It really is. And it seems that you hit 40 and suddenly you're interested in where you came from and who was that auntie that used to rub your head when you were small, but they're gone now.
With the brown paper
and so cherish and talk to old people. Things that may be ancient history to you, they remember being there. And So get curious.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to old family, talk to relatives, before they are gone physically, mentally. That was a challenge when I wanted to research, that the auntie that I really wanted to talk to, because she was my grandfather's sister.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was interested, she was no longer here. There are survivors from the Taylor gas disaster. There are survivors from the Yarmouth Castle disaster around now. Too traumatized to bring it up unless you ask. And there are other disasters. There's the Sea Hauler disaster that has left a whole bunch of people traumatized. And that story is one that I will tell in some detail when the time is right. Yeah. So again, thank you for having me.
Awesome stuff. Yeah. And I don't know. We got to bring you back for another topic, but I'm already thinking about. But we walk that path a little later on. So we got some things coming up. Heroes Day. So understand. Well, thank you kindly on behalf of Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles and the crew. We love to have you. We wish you all the best with your books. I will try to read them not like a textbook, because I have not learned how to read books not like a textbook yet. So I go from chapter, bounce to the next one, and come back, and sometimes I miss some things.
Yeah, that's fine.
Try to do it, and so forth.
Read what interests you, what grabs you.
Okay, see, Mom, I hear that. See, I can say at 60-some years of age, I can say, Mom, he said, just read what I interested in.
Mm-hmm.
Me get in trouble tonight.
Yeah.
But anyway, awesome. Thank you again. Like you said, be blessed, enjoy yourselves, and as we come forward, we will endeavor to touch base with you again, so we could bring you back. And do stay in touch and drop notes on the links, the pages, so that we could keep up to date as to what's happening with you. Okay?
Oh, okay, Happy.
Great. So, folks, thank you all for joining us at Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles this evening, and listening to this provocative talk that hopefully will have stimulated your minds and stretched it, so that we will go forward and build this nation from strength to strength, and move away from some of this tribalism that we do, and all this negative bashing, and get involved in some of the not necessarily intellect, but the thought-provoking and stimulating things that can be productive in helping us build wealth for our families and so forth. And I always say wealth is not just cash. You got to put some things in your head to move, and then we go from there. And we go forward. And before we go, I guess we have one more lesson there. For instance, we need to know where we came from and where we are. So yes, and that might be a conversation that we will have on the show shortly also. And I don't know where this thing is coming from, but it's coming from right there. And so as we find that, we want you to know, be blessed, stay safe, and don't get flooded.
Enjoyed the show? Then subscribe to us for more educational and inspirational content. Ring the bell so you never miss a show. Let's change the narrative, 242.